Hello and welcome to Season 5 of Let's Talk Medtech. We're kicking off this season with special guest Neil Klompas, the CEO of Augurex, a company looking to end the diagnostic delays in autoimmune diseases. So buckle up and let's get ready. For new listeners, thank you for checking us out. And for long-time listeners, thanks for continuing to support the podcast. And now, let's talk MedTech with Neil Klompas. Well, good morning and welcome to Let's Talk MedTech. Neil, how are you?
Really good. Thanks for having me on today, Omar.
No, listen, it's awesome having you up here. I'm glad that you could take the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us at Let's Talk MedTech. Uh, I want to delve into the company. I want to talk a little bit about Augurex, but before I do that, can we take several steps back and can we talk about your career in healthcare? What made you decide to work in this industry?
Great question, Omar. Like a lot of people, you kind of end up here because it fits kind of your goal of really helping society, helping people. I took a slightly different route. Unlike a lot of your prior guests, I'm not a physician by training, but I did start in the delivery of healthcare, actually as a medic with the Army and a paramedic in the, so to speak, real world.
Wow.
And I just realized I like helping people. And one day, a bunch of emergency room docs took me aside and they said, "Kid, you're really smart. You should go to college." So now that was kind of an eye opener after a couple of degrees and a research grant where I realized I really love science, but I can't see myself pipetting for the next, 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
I think I did what everybody does, right? I did my CPA. So from the bench to the calculator, where I really focused with one of the big four, accounting firms in the biotech and pharma and medtech practices. First up here in Canada, and then moved to the Princeton Philly area where I worked with one of the national life sciences advisory practices on M&A. That was a great experience. Joined the practice that actually represented IDEC back in the Biogen IDEC merger. So I'm dating myself on that one. But after that, joined a biotech startup called Zymeworks. Joined when we were just 5 folks and grew it to 500 or 600 IPO on the NYSE. And really excited because the drugs that we worked on for those years got FDA approval just last year, and then recently passed a phase 3 study in gastroesophageal cancer. So really seeing those, over a decade of work benefit patients, get those approvals, it's pretty rewarding. I like to think there's easier ways to make a buck than in biotech and medtech, but I don't think there's any more rewarding ways. So that's kind of what brought me here.
Agreed, agreed. And it's amazing that you just followed that product, that you could see its journey, even though you're with a different company now. And those things kind of stay with you, right? You remember when it was a company of 5 or 6 and it grew to like 500. You kind of go through all the transitions. And I know you said you were dating yourself. Um, I do the same thing too. I started in this business. I started covering med tech back in 2007. And I think the hot technology then was I think it was drug-eluting stents, as a matter of fact, and AI was not even heard of, or I'm not going to say not heard of. It wasn't really discussed in medtech that much, or machine learning. It wasn't really a thing back in 2007. So I definitely understand how things transition and how things move along, and just kind of sticking with a product and seeing it come into fruition. You're like, yeah, I was a part of that. I was a
Yeah,
part of that
definitely.
history. Yeah, yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about the company, about Augurex. And what would you say is the basic problem that the company is trying to solve? What is the company's core mission, and how do you go about accomplishing that mission?
Well, I think the fundamental premise for the diagnostics industry is you cannot treat a disease until you diagnose it, right? It
Yes.
all starts with diagnostics, and that's what Augurex is focused in. So we are 100% committed to the autoimmune sector within the diagnostic space.
Mhm.
Really, the company was founded around a very novel biomarker. And in this age of genomics and proteomic tests, pardon me,
No.
um, it's really interesting because this is a soluble protein biomarker and actually brings a lot of diagnostic insight to some pretty serious areas of unmet need within autoimmunity. Our biomarker 1433 eta was discovered around 2000. My predecessor in the team here at Augurex in-licensed it in around 2005. And really, the first application was looking at how do we increase the clinical knowledge around rheumatoid arthritis. Now, there are some great biomarkers for RA out there. 1433 eta, or our go-to-market name, JointStat,
Mhm.
really adds a lot of diagnostic value in early RA, in rheumatoid factor negative or seronegative RA. But what we're really excited right now is kind of what the FDA just granted us breakthrough device designation approval for just last month, which is the world's first dedicated biomarker with a label in an autoimmune disease called axial spondyloarthritis. Now, I know that's a mouthful. We can refer to it as inflammatory back pain to differentiate it from mechanical back pain, your
Sure.
normal twists and falls, or we can just call it AxSpA, which is probably what I'll do for the sake of simplicity. AxSpA is a really interesting autoimmune condition. If we contrast it with rheumatoid arthritis, a disease that I think everybody's heard of,
Yes.
um, RA has a prevalence rate of about 0.6%. AxSpA actually has more than double that, a prevalence rate of 1.4%, which is it's interesting because this is a disease that manifests as chronic back pain. And, NIH and World Health Organization actually state that around 28% of the adult population experiences chronic back pain lasting for more than 3 months. And I think this is where the unmet need really comes up. A lot of people, and I know I've been there, Omar,
Mhm.
you develop some back pain and you think, I got to stretch more. I got to make it to the gym,
Mhm.
uh, maybe buy a new pair of sneakers, get a standing desk. Maybe it's just part of getting a bit older. Things creak in the morning. I don't think anyone thinks, God, I've got an autoimmune disease. I should see a rheumatologist because I've got back pain. And the data bears that out. Rheumatoid arthritis, when your joints start to hurt, has a diagnostic delay of 1 to 2 years.
Mhm.
People kind of twig really early on, hey, I should see a rheumatologist about this. But the North American average for the onset of back pain to seeing a rheumatologist for AxSpA conditions is 9.1 years. The global average is between 7 to 10. We're
Mhm.
talking about a progressive degenerative autoimmune disease that can lead to spinal fusions, curvature of the back,
Mhm.
permanent disability, and it's going undiagnosed. So when you ask what Augurex is really dedicated to, yes, we're focused in autoimmune diagnostics, but you know, right now we're really focused on making a difference in AxSpA. As I mentioned earlier this year,
Sure.
FDA gave us breakthrough designation, and even before that, both Health Canada and the UK's MHRA approved this as an IVD for the diagnosis of AxSpA, making it the first on-label diagnostic in that space.
That's interesting to me when we're talking about diagnostics and approvals, and I know that that can kind of that can kind of get a little bit murky, right? Especially in the US. How has the pathway been to trying to obtain approval? How has that regulatory pathway been for you all with this diagnostic?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. It can be a journey and it can be navigating different markets. And that's even before you get into pricing and reimbursement and market access.
We won't even
But
talk about reimbursement now. Yeah.
but the journey to approval in those jurisdictions it's pretty straightforward. But I got to give credit to FDA. Our interactions with FDA really took us on a path that helped us sharpen our focus. They gave us some feedback, I'd say late last year, when we took a data set to them and said, hey, here we go. We've got really good data for diagnosing axSpA versus healthy controls, a standard control population. And to FDA's credit, they said, that's great and it's strong data, but it's not healthy people that are going to go in and get this test. It's those patients with mechanical back pain that I picked up a box wrong, or I twisted wrong, or I've got a sports injury. And they really said, this is the kind of data, comparison to mechanical back pain, that no one's really put in front of us, which is one of the reasons why we haven't seen a lot of diagnostic innovation here. So over the last year, we partnered with clinical key opinion leaders around the world. And at the American College of Rheumatology this year, we actually presented 2 data sets using anti-1433-eta, which is the autoantibodies against the protein. In fact, a multiplex assay that we've branded as SpineStat versus both radiographic and non-radiographic axSpA and mechanical back pain controls. Rheumatologists get this. They actually see 7 mechanical back pain patients for every 1 axSpA patient, because there's no easy way to screen and refer patients. If you just think about how that backlog is creating this logjam in a specialty practice. They're seeing patients that they don't need to see. This is where we come in on screening. So we were able to get these retrospective samples from leading clinical key opinion leaders. And sure enough, mechanical back pain, when compared to SpineStat, mechanical back pain performs exactly like healthy controls, which was really the 2 data sets that said, hey, we're onto something. We can make a real difference in this disease.
Amazing, amazing. I guess now, where do you go from here? Because this seems like you could have maybe a couple of indications. I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself with this, especially when you're still trying to get approval. But it seems like you could go a lot of different places because of that data.
So we're really privileged to work with some of the world's leading patient advocacy groups
Sure.
to get the voice of the patient in here. Groups like the Spondyloarthritis Association of America, Cassie Schaefer, who leads that organization, is just fantastic, and they're the leading voice of the patient. But really, it is trying to figure out how we educate not only patients around the world, but primary care physicians as well. There's a paper that came out earlier this year from Yale, from Abhijit Danvi, and it really looked at the awareness of axSpA in the primary care physician kind of population. And I got to say, this paper lives rent-free in my head, because the data just keeps resonating.
Mhm.
So in several thousand primary care physicians, or what he calls non-rheumatology physicians, just the awareness of axSpA. So when a patient presents with back pain, how often do you consider, autoimmune conditions like axSpA? 20% said never. They
Wow.
just, it's not in their kind of thought process when they
Yeah.
think about back pain. And 49%, so effectively 50%, said sometimes. So that's 70% of the primary care docs who are either never or just sometimes even considering autoimmune.
Mm.
And again, if we think about that 9-year diagnostic delay in North America, we think about the global average of 7 to 10,
Mhm.
it's really interesting, because at that 5-year point, you start to see radiographic progression.
Mhm.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's also when permanent disability in the spine starts to set in.
Mhm.
So if we can educate patients that, hey, there's a simple blood test out there, no harder than getting your cholesterol checked when you start to develop back pain, and help to educate primary care physicians that, hey, maybe part of screening back pain, which is the second leading cause of primary care visits after the common cold,
Sure. Sure.
um,
Yeah.
and figure out a way that we can not only bring this to the primary care, the reference labs, like LabCorp and some of the others who we're already working with on
Mhm.
the RA side. But if we can bring it to, the awareness of the PTs and the massage therapy community, the people that are actually seeing back pain patients sometimes twice a week or
Yeah.
weekly, we could really change the whole global approach
Mhm.
to not only this disease, but triaging back pain. It's really interesting. At about that 5-year point when you start to see disability,
Mhm.
um, many of these patients actually end up on opiates as well for pain management.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, if we could even take a dent or make a dent in the opioid crisis by getting the right patients off of pain management,
Mhm.
that would be fantastic. To say nothing of avoiding the permanent disability from spinal fusions from this disease. Um, I think coming back to why somebody gets into medtech and biotech to begin with, it's so you can help folks, right?
Yeah.
And when we looked at this opportunity at Augurex, it ticked all those boxes.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that we've been talking about a little bit, just about that delay, because as we've been having this conversation, it's just striking me, that delay in the diagnosis. And, we've talked about a little bit about why. And the result of it is you lose a lot of time with this. And I know that we need patient education, but do you think that there's not patient, but physician education as well? But do you think that there's kind of a stigma when it comes to back pain? You might have some people that say, "Oh, I'll tough it out," or "Oh, I don't think that this is that bad of an issue," or they just don't realize the implications. I think there might be a little something more there, just a stigma surrounding back pain. Am I going somewhere, or am I just kind of way off base? Just curious.
I can't speak for everybody, but
Sure,
I
sure.
can speak for myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I've spent way too long in the office chair from time to time, or
Yeah.
skipped a few gym days here or there,
Mhm, mhm.
maybe more than once or twice. And so you do think, oh God, yeah, I got to make it back to the gym. I got to stretch more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yoga, well, maybe I'm not a yoga guy, but there are things you can do. So I think
Yeah,
there is some self-evaluation. Also, a lot of folks maybe think, yeah, back pain's just part of getting older, or,
sure.
playing a lot of football or rugby in your youth, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, for me, it was, hopping out of the back of ambulances and trucks and the occasional helicopter. There's just
Yeah,
things that you do um, in your youth, maybe earlier in career, that you just think, okay, well, maybe if I had done things differently early in my career. So I don't know if there's a stigma, but I think maybe there's an acceptance of back
I
pain is
gotcha.
just
Yeah.
part of getting older.
Mhm.
Um, but I think we got to make a distinction between, the normal aches and pains
Mhm.
or mechanical back pain
Sure, sure.
and the kind of back pain that drives people to take opiates
Yeah.
and multiple visits to spinal consults and orthopedic surgeons. And I think there's a difference. I can't speak to any stigmas, but maybe just an awareness that, hey, if we can screen out what is, and the data shows us this, about 10 to 14% of all back pain is probably autoimmune if you kind of follow the prevalence rates. If you can catch that early with a simple test, yeah, I just think the benefits not only to patients, freeing up time with specialty, but to the healthcare system at all. Because AxSpa can be treated. It's really interested. It's different enough from RA
Mhm.
that most of the biomarkers that are used to diagnose rheumatoid arthritis don't actually show up. So we're talking about autonuclear antibodies, ANA, rheumatoid factor. Um, those are just, it's seronegative. And interestingly, in that subset of primary care docs from that study I was talking about earlier, more than half, if they do suspect autoimmune, will order those two tests. Because it's kind of like, oh, it's autoimmune, it's rheumatic. All right, what do I order for rheumatoid arthritis? Oh, I order these biomarkers. They're always going to come back negative because this, again, this disease is just different enough
Mhm.
that those biomarkers don't show up. So I think that's leading those docs down the wrong path. And that's not to say there aren't biomarkers and tests that can be used. Again, they're not on label, but guidelines do indicate that, C-reactive protein or CRP is used in the diagnosis of this disease. CRP does show up in rheumatoid arthritis, but C-reactive protein is a general inflammatory biomarker. It shows up in rheumatic indications like RA, also shows up post-cardiac events, it shows up in systemic infection, shows up in, you get higher elevated levels after strenuous exercise, actually.
Yeah.
So it's good, but it's not great. Another biomarker is a genetic marker, HLA-B27. But again, the prevalence of that genetic marker has a really wide variability based on ethnic background. For example, it's largely absent in Asian populations, yet because it's better than nothing and it is a strong correlation in North American and European populations, it is part of guidelines. You know, we've got such great support from the global, clinical key opinion leader community that the current or the incoming head of the Japanese Rheumatological Society, when he heard about this, and he has a freezer full of patient samples of HLA-B27 negative patients, he's like, we need something in Japan. Like,
Wow.
here you go. Like, assay this. Let's see the utility in HLA-B27. And that's really, it's humbling to hear that kind of support from the clinical community around the world going, yeah, we need something. ACR put us on stage with one of our collaborators just last month, Dr. Raj Sangupta, who leads the Rheumatological Center for Excellence in AXPA at Bath University in the UK. And again, we're just seeing docs from around the world, not only here in the US and Canada, but everywhere, step forward going, yeah, let's all work together to get the right patients into the right care early. Because again, while it's just different enough that our diagnostics don't work, it is actually similar enough that all the therapeutics out there for RA, or most of them, actually have labels in AXPA. So your biosimilar Humiras, your Taltzes, your Bimzelx. So it's not like we can't treat this disease. We just got to find it first.
Wow. Good point. Good point. And that's the key to any effective diagnostic. You've got to be able to find it first, and it can do that. We just have to get the awareness out there. Well, want to ask you one last question. What does 2026 look like for the company? What are some of your goals for 2026?
Yeah, great question. So, as I mentioned, with our first diagnostic product, 14338, joint stat in the rest of the world, we're lucky enough to partner with some of the leading labs in the US and around the world. We've been partnered with Quest, LabCorp, which has a huge emphasis in autoimmune.
Sure.
We
Sure.
recently announced partnering with Sonic Reference Labs, which, while they might not be as popular in the States as Quest and LabCorp, they're actually one of the leading lab companies around the world. So hopefully, continuing discussions beyond joint stat into spine stat, but following up on that breakthrough designation with FDA, that long path to moving towards approval. That's not going to stop us from utilizing the LDT pathway to get this into the hands of patients.
Sure.
And at the same time, looking around the world, this is a disease that impacts everybody. So continuing to gain commercial traction in Canada, the UK, and some other jurisdictions, knock on wood, that we'll be announcing pretty shortly here. And just figuring out how we can work with physicians and patients to raise awareness around this. Maybe stepping away from the traditional rheumatology conferences, not that they're excellent, but the rheumatologists get this. This is the one thing we have learned. So how do we reach the primary care community, the orthopedic community, maybe the PT and physio communities? So we've got our thinking caps on, and our bags are packed. We're going to be on the road a bit. And at the same time, as we talked about, working with those key opinion leaders to continue to build that body of clinical data You know, JointStat, our RA test, has been used by over 1.7 million patients since launch. We're excited to get there with SpineStat as well. So 2026 is going to be a big year. We're pretty excited, Omar.
Awesome. 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 Well, Neil, thanks for coming on to MedTech. Appreciate having you here.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. And listen, thank you for not only having us and spreading the word, but as some of the other guests have said, medtech diagnostics, it's a tough biz. So the support and the voice of journalists and podcasters like yourself means a lot to the entire community. So thank you.
Anytime. Thanks. That's it for this episode of Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks once again to our guest, Neil Klompas, Augurex's CEO. Look, if you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk MedTech and you're just into MedTech in general, please check us out at mddionline.com. That's mddionline.com. You can find anything related to the medical device industry and the diagnostic industry there. All kinds of news, all kinds of content. It's just an amazing site. I'm going to plug it one more time, mddionline.com. And finally, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Let's Talk MedTech podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast.